I started in ministry in 1957 after 4 years of study at Avondale, and our first appointment, we were married very soon after graduation, and my wife and I left for North New Zealand, where we were to work for the next quite a few years.
Well, I was appointed to the little church that only had a dozen people in it at Wallsend, and after 3 years I had built a church. I attended the Burnside mission. There was a baptism of 80 people, 83 people, the big baptism in the tent. It was an amazing experience.
I graduated from Avondale College in 1944. I really started in Perth. I had the privilege of being a part of an evangelistic team conducted by Pastor Tom Bradley.
I think the greatest joy for anybody involved in ministry, at least gospel ministry, is to see souls baptised. And it was always a thrill to study with people and to see the changes in their lives and then to see them in the waters of baptism. As far as my educational work was concerned, which is the majority of my experience, to see young people growing in the faith, learning to become teachers and ministers in their training period, that was always a great joy. And of course, since then, it's wonderful to see the young people that you taught at Avondale in positions of leadership. That always brings a thrill.
I had the privilege of working with George Burnside in Newcastle. It was a very big mission. The tent was in the main street. Of course, there's no room in the main street of Newcastle nowadays, but there was in the days, 49, more like 50, Burnside erected a large tent that would seat somewhere about 800, maybe even 1,000, and he had a full year campaign, not a 3-week mission. I can remember the night that the biggest baptism I've ever attended was in the tent. We'd built a baptistry in the back of the tent, and we had an audience that night when we were bringing the water from the Newcastle hospital, where we bought hot water and put it in drums on a truck and delivered it to the tent. And on the way in, even George Burnside came around to try and shush the noise that the several men working in behind the stage were making, and the boys couldn't hold one of the drums, let the drum go, and George Burnside was baptised himself ahead of all the rest because there was a wave through the tank and he walked away in silence to carry on the baptism a little later in the evening. It was a memorable occasion because the lady, who was from the island somewhere, was singing a special hymn, great song, Beside Still Waters.
I've got lots of stories. I'm just wondering how much you have in lots of time. I would like to highlight the story of a couple who came to my evangelistic program in Adelaide. There were 2 of them travelling incognito, and they came to Adelaide and decided to pull up in a park and spend the weekend there before going on to Western Australia. And this particular man, and I'll call him Brownie, and his wife, pulled up alongside of an Adventist lady, and she got talking to them and said, "What are you doing on Sunday night?" So they came along to the meetings, and ultimately I used to go to their caravan and study the Bible with them. And it was just amazing the change that came into their lives. They said, "Pastor, we would like to give you a gift." And Brownie went out under the caravan. He ransacked among some things there, and he brought up a big banana box. And Brownie and his wife went to all the cupboards and drawers where they could in their caravan and filled that box up to overflowing, putting in the top with bottles of liquor of all kinds. And they said, "Pastor, we've finished with this, and we'd like to give it as a gift to you." And I thought, what a wonderful gift. And I accepted that. And after my meeting was over with them, Brownie helped me carry it out and put it into the boot of my car. And so I drove home with this in my precious gift in the boot of my car. Halfway home, I almost fainted with thinking, what if I have an accident? Here, this town hall, Billy Graham type of fellow, look what we found in his boot. So I drove home very carefully.
In those days, evangelism was very much more public evangelism. I think that probably most graduates from Avondale at that period of time went out and worked in evangelistic efforts. It's not done so much today because the days of big public efforts in cities has sort of gone by the board a bit. But in those days, that was very much something that was expected, and that there were men like John Colthart, Austin Cook, these men, George Burnside in the earlier years, who conducted large evangelistic efforts, and that was very successful in those days. I think people were not so tied to television sets and to not coming out as they are today, and you usually got a large crowd in the cities, and that was a real blessing.
At the very early part of my ministry, I used to go out and take Bible studies 3 a night. And out of the group that was on the Burnside mission, there were more. I had the territory 7 miles from the tent, but I had the most people ready for baptism.
One of the most delightful programs that we held together was in Barclay Theatre in Melbourne. We had meetings there for 2 years. They were exceptional meetings, and I always advertised my meetings. The opening meeting around the end of the world, the coming of Jesus, and announced them as Bible lectures.
I have never forgotten the experience that I had some years ago. It was in New Zealand, but after I had preached, I was greeting the people at the door, and a lady came by and said that she was the local Presbyterian minister's wife. I was a little surprised to wonder why the local Presbyterian minister's wife was at an Adventist church on Sabbath morning. I have never forgotten her answer, because she said that I have seen the glory of Jesus in the face of my neighbour, and I could not help but come. I have often prayed that kind of divine compulsion, where she said I couldn't help but come, could come through all of our people. I believe the mission of the church has not changed since it was presented to us way back 160, 170 years ago, that we have been raised up as a prophetic people on time to proclaim God's last message to the world. I mean, that's an awesome responsibility when you think about it, that the last message that God is ever going to send to this world, we have the responsibility to proclaim. And so the messages of the 3 angels, that must be a feature of our preaching and our teaching. It's good to talk about the love of Jesus, and that's most important and most basic. But we must never forget that we've been raised to not just proclaim Jesus' love, not just to proclaim the everlasting gospel, but to proclaim the everlasting gospel in the setting of the three angels' messages, announcing God's judgment hour has come, calling the world to worship the Creator. That's a significant call in these days. Announcing the fall of the confusion of the religious world in the last days, and warning against the false worship that will be so evident in the last days. And that must never be forgotten, otherwise we don't really understand the reason for our existence.
My mission was to tell as many people as I could that Jesus is coming back and there's a new world dawning.
I think the biggest challenges facing the church today are the forces of secularism and materialism, particularly in Western countries. In Australia particularly, I guess, we've become a very secular nation. That's partly the result, I think, of the Christian church not giving a very powerful reason for its existence to the people of Australia. People have been turned away from churchy Christianity, but the message of Christ still meets the needs of people. And yet today people can live and think they can live without God. There are attacks against Christianity today that I never knew 15, 20 years ago. Attacks on God as a creator. But people today think that they can exist without God. We're very blessed in this country. The forces of materialism are powerful. And those, I think, are real challenges to the church of these days.
The biggest challenge of all is a swing by the total church to worldliness. And it's a problem all over the world. We've got the books, we've got everything we need, and yet the church is sagging, and I am afraid that the Lord Jesus is putting off his coming, waiting for the people to become absolutely more sincere, more loving, more kind, more Christian, more like Jesus.
Because of my interest in the heritage, the history of our church, I am very conscious as I talk to many of our church members that many don't know why the Adventist Church came into existence. And I feel very strongly that if we lose our sense of the past, it affects the way we look at the church today, and that certainly affects the way we think of the mission of the church. I always remember the words of a historian who said that if you want to liquidate a people, if you want to destroy a people, a nation particularly, he said, then destroy its culture, its books, and its history. And then he said something very significant. Soon that nation will forget what it is and what it was. And I would add that if we forget what we were and why we exist today, it's very much going to affect our mission for the church. Why do we exist? To preach a message. And that must be rooted in our understanding of why God raised us up in the past. I think that the most important thing that any Christian needs is to have a real living relationship with Jesus. And whatever methods we can bring into the church to remind people of their love for Jesus. I think in terms of a prophetic reason for saying this, that in terms of, say, the Laodicean message of Revelation 3, here are a people who are rich or think they are rich and increased with goods and have need of nothing. But really they are needing the most basic understanding of being a Christian, because you remember Jesus is knocking on the outside of the Laodicean church, wanting to come in. And is that saying something to us? He tells us there that we're to buy from him the gold and the eye salve, etc., so that we might see ourselves as we really are. And while it's a cliche to think of this, getting to know Jesus is certainly something that every Adventist Christian really needs. It's not just knowing about him, but it's really knowing him personally. And I believe that when we really know him personally, that's going to affect the way we relate to our neighbours, the way we relate to the challenges that are before the church. If we don't know Jesus, we don't really have the essence of the message that we've got to bear to the world.
Back in the days when I graduated from ministerial course at Avondale in 1944, back in those days, all the ministerial graduates were regarded as being trained for evangelism. We didn't have the concept back there that you're going to get appointed to be a pastor of this church or that church. We expected to go out and be connected with an evangelist or go out and do evangelism ourselves. And I'm so glad that I never kind of caught this concept that I'm going out to be a church pastor. I'm going to be pastoring this church or that church. No, we weren't trained to do that. In my days, we were considered to be young evangelists.
It worries me sometimes that I think that we tell the church that they ought to be giving Bible studies, etc., but we're not always training them to know how to do these things. Because we live in a very materialistic world today, I think that some of the very basic questions we're skirting around in terms of what we might call apologetics, and by that I mean the reasons for our faith. Is there a God? We assume our young people particularly know answers to these questions. The question, is the Bible inspired? How did the Bible come to exist? Those kind of questions that may appear to be very basic to our understanding are not really treated in the way we relate to our young people today. And I think that we've got to have develop, I guess, training sessions for dealing with those questions, as well as practical sessions on how to share your faith. One of the most effective methods that I've been aware of, particularly in recent years, and particularly again here in North New South Wales, is the Arise School of Evangelism. I have taught there for the last 2 or 3 years, and that is a marvellous program. I think that this is playing a major role in training our young people. I'm a great believer that the future of the church lies in our young people. They're the ones who are going to finish the work. And the Arise School is such a complete program. It's so Christ-centred. The young people that I have spoken to who have participated in Arise all tell me how much they have seen the love of God permeating through the Adventist message, something exciting to share with the people.
I can't see anything better than the church pastor being the leader of a church evangelistically minded and driven. I don't believe that our churches thrive when we kind of think of our pastor as being one who feeds the flock. Rather, I feel that he should be regarded as one that leads the flock to outreach.
I think the pastor ought to be imitating Jesus and carrying in his life the goodness, the loveliness, everything about him to his congregation, that they will imitate Jesus in the same way as he does.